Has anybody not been into the new library at the Great North Museum? For the sake of those who haven't been into the library, you come out of the Haymarket, past the statue of William Armstrong, and up the front, and there's the front of the building, and you notice it's got the name Hancock on the front. It's only recently it's been added this exhibit on Great North Museum. To my way of thinking, it should be the Great Midlands Museum, because we're only halfway up the British Isles. But so you're going through the front door and you come into the big room, and immediately you find there's a great barrier across the big room. You can either take a running jump at it, but I don't think anybody's done it. And the big barrier is the model of the Roman wall. And you're coming up from the west side. So in fact, you're going towards Scotland. So why anybody would ever want to go across it, I'm not sure. But it does show what an amazing barrier it is when it blocks off a whole room. Now, so then you go in to the lift shaft, go up to floor 2, and there's the library in front of you. And the library is a joint library. It's the University Archaeology Department, the Cowan Library, the Society of Antiquaries, but the biggest section of the library is the Natural History Society, and it's their building. Can you still hear me at the back? Right. If I drop my voice. And when you come in, turn right, you see our wonderful librarian, Rebecca Knight, or Becca, who's in the corner there. Now, at this point, I'm going to say a little bit about myself. So you can look at these books. It's a chain. This is the chained library, the ideal library where people don't borrow the books, don't pinch them, don't lose them. And I thought this was very old, but it was actually the library actually only dates back to the 1680s, and the chains were only put on in the 1690s. It's at Winbourne in the New Forest. While I was there was a Geordie there, and he looked at the books and he said, "Hey, they're all Greek." And they were as well. I'm just going to say a little bit about myself. As you realise, I was born in Yorkshire. My father was a farmer, and my father was also teetotal. So he never went to the pub. He used to have his mates around, great dart player. And I went to bed as a child quite early, but I don't sleep very much. And so I used to lie on the floor, and I could see them through the floorboard cracks and listen to all their conversation, talking about, all the family history. Because when you live in the country, it's a very small area, not many people. And so we knew everything about everybody. And of course, the country's full of humps and bumps and ruins. We had cup and ring rocks around in the area. And so this is why I had a great interest in history. And to my way of thinking, history is a sort of nosiness, getting to know everything about everybody. Now, at school, I had to make a choice between doing history and chemistry. And I thought, well, you can probably read up about history, so I chose chemistry. And when I left school, did O levels, left school, couldn't stand school. And so I worked on the farm for a while, getting it all into order, cutting all the hedges and digging the ditches. And then I thought I couldn't really see much future in being a small tenant farmer. I mean, not small in height, just a small farm. So I finished up getting a job as a student technician in a local laboratory. Did 3 years of 3 nights a week night classes. And then unfortunately, the Queen got to hear about me. And she said, it's time you joined the army. Well, that caused a bit of consternation amongst the generals. And they had a big conference. and eventually decided I could do least damage on Salisbury Plain. So they sent me to Salisbury Plain for nearly 2 years at the military hospital called Tidworth, where I actually finished up being in charge of the lab. But the great thing about being on Salisbury Plain is it's just full of archaeology. Everything you could possibly imagine, right back to Stonehenge. And Stonehenge is the most remarkable place. People came on a sort of pilgrimage from as far away as the Orkney Islands and brought their own pigs and even brought a huge lump of rock from Caithness. I wonder if it's a bit like the way the Muslims have to go to Mecca once in a lifetime. But the main thing is these people already had a sense of history. But history had to be carried down by word of mouth. So it gets garbled a bit like Chinese whispers. And it's not until we get onto written history, people like Bede writing the history of England, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, forgotten his name, Geoffrey of Monmouth with his sort of spurious history. And then, of course, we get printing introduced. And the country settles down after the Civil War and what I call the Age of Enlightenment. I had to hunt around to find a glass under the desk out there. And so you get these organisations formed, the Royal Society in 1660, Antiquaries of London, the Antiquaries of Scotland. But most important in this area, the Lytton Phil, formed in 1793. But the Lytton Phil didn't really cover the sorts of things that were being found, the artifacts, the buildings, the history. There were what it says on the title, Lytton Phil. John Bell was a remarkable man. At the age of 19, he became a bookseller on the quayside and dealt in coins. He didn't follow his father's business, which was land surveying. And as early as 1803, he set up this numismatics, very difficult word to say that, numismatic society. But it only lasted a year because the people all fell out with each other. But it was from him, and principally from him, the Society of Antiquaries was formed in 1813. So the Society of Antiquaries had its birth via the Lytton Phil, and of course the Natural History Society, 1829, from the same, and the Mining Institute, which I discovered was formed in 1852, and antiquarian societies in various places, and of course the university, all stem from the Lytton Phil. So the first full meeting of the Lytton Phil was 1813. So tonight we're celebrating the 212th anniversary. And it arose because John Bell had circulated a letter. And the first full meeting of the society was in February of that year. And there was 14 of the members, 14 of the 46 members were called John. And John Bell presented 2 books, which reminds me, one of them's in the bag and I forgot to get it out. Exhibit number 1. Pretty carefully wrapped up by Becker. Where was I? I've lost the magic gadget. Here we are. Right. So John Bell presented 2 books, but I've only brought one. And the library is formed where to store them. But just to go back to the founders of the library, the 3 principal characters, who I call the Johns, were youngish men of various backgrounds. When I did this originally, John Hodgson was 24 years old, but there seemed to be some doubt, and he was definitely 34 years old, so he was slightly older than I thought. He was a vicar, local vicar, and he'd already had to deal with a felling disaster when 200 men and boys were killed in an explosion in the mines in 1812, and another one a year after. John Bell was 29 years old, and John Adamson was a solicitor. He was 26 years old. So you've seen the 2 pictures there is John Hodgson on the left and John Adamson on the, depends which way you're looking. Yeah, left. John Hodgson, John Adamson. And John Bell is pictured, his drawing is in Men of Mark. The Society's first officers, John Adamson, John Hodgson, secretaries, and the treasurer, John Bell. But in 1816, John Bell had to resign in consequence of some disarrangement of his private affairs. That's sort of 19th century speech by John Collingwood Bruce. I became bankrupt. So he was appointed librarian on a small salary, but unfortunately, owing to my personal family situations, I've not been able to make it to the county record office. So it would be interesting to find out how much it was paid. But he had to give out books every Wednesday evening. And he was librarian from 1816 to 1849, or as it says in the front of Archaeologia, till 1864. So it's not terribly clear. Just from the Dictionary of National Biography is briefly mentioned about after his bankruptcy, he moved to Gateshead. He did some land surveying, book selling, and his younger brother had 17,000 books on his death in 1860, which is far more than the Society Antiquaries Library had at that time. So where were the books kept? Well, initially in John Adamson's house, but the books were needed at the monthly meetings because in those days they didn't have a lecturer. The gentlemen, and they were all men, the only woman was an honorary member who lived in Cumberland, or was it Westmoreland? And so they needed the books for reference at the monthly meetings. Where did they meet? Well, I won't go into all the details, but they met in various pubs, locations, which included Lytton Phil. But at that time, the Lytton Phil itself didn't have any fixed location. In 1818, they were able to get access to the keep, but one winter in the keep was enough for them. So so they didn't find a permanent home until 1825. And I have to excuse the picture because I just took it off the internet and it's a bit blurred. But this year is the 200th anniversary of the building of the Lytton Phil. And there'll be celebrations about that later. The library arrangement, well, books are awkward. Why they can't make books all the same size, I don't know. I mean, I've suggested cutting them down a bit. And they can be filed by author, subject, date, or even by colour. My sister-in-law has books all arranged by the colour, which is quite nice. I think the Lytton Phil had a separate room. Sorry, I think the Society of Antiquaries had a separate room at the Lytton Phil. presumably just opened on a Wednesday night, as specified by John Bell. And gradually over the years, they acquired fine glass-fronted bookshelves, and you'll see some pictures of those when we later on when I show the black gate. Each of the bookshelves was given a number, and each shelf in the bookshelf was given a letter, and the position of the book on the shelf was given a number. So 3B7, which you'll find in front of some of these books, just meant it was the third book on, it was the third cabinet, second shelf, seven along. And I think this is a really good system. And during COVID, I did all my books at home like this. Unfortunately, we moved house, and I had to give half of them to Oxfam, so I'm back to square one. But there's more to the library than just books, particularly at that time, because there was nowhere else to put these things. So the society was busy collecting deeds, archives, and maps, plans, notes, and pictures, even furniture. This piece of furniture in 1824 by William Chapman was oak found underneath the Roman wall making the Carlisle Canal. And I thought, that's a strange thing. And I began to wonder, maybe the Roman wall was built on logs of wood, just like Stephenson's railway over the Moss. And then I looked in David Breeze's book, and David had also found an example of the Roman wall being built on logs. Anyway, Richard Farrington designed it, and there is a book. There is a chair. It cost all of 8 guineas. It's a huge chair, and unfortunately, we can't find presidents big enough to sit in it. So it remains in the office. I think it should go into a museum somewhere. And then in 1826, the Reverend Hollingsworth, rector of Haltwhistle, he came into Featherstone Castle. He had inherited it, or for some reason, he moved into Featherstone Castle, and these chairs were surplus to requirements. And they're very fine chairs, and they're finished up in the library. But I'll come back to those later. So now we come on to John Collingwood Bruce, an amazing character. He was born just before the Battle of Trafalgar. And the Collingwood, as far as I can see, had got nothing to do with Collingwood in the Battle of Trafalgar. It was a family name. His father was one of the founding members of the society, another John Bruce, and he had the Bruce's Academy in Newcastle. And Collingwood Bruce, when he was about 19 or 20, went to Glasgow University. He couldn't go to university in England because he was a Presbyterian, and you had to be Church of England to go to university. And so he set off on his trip to the university, coach and horses, along the military road to Carlisle. And on the way, somebody pointed out to him that he could see the Roman wall in the road. And that was 70 years after the military road had been made. And in a letter back to his friend, he said, "One day I will make a pilgrimage of the Roman wall," which seems to be the earliest reference to the Roman wall. Anyway, he took a degree in holy orders, but never practiced it, and eventually joined his father in the Bruce's Academy, and then his father died early, and so he finished up running the Bruce's Academy. Now, everybody will recognize this. This is a plate. Well, they won't recognize the plate because it's on our wall at home. and it's not exactly an accurate representation, but I think the boats in the middle are. But it's a biotapestry. What on earth has a biotapestry got to do with the Society of Antiquaries? Well, it hadn't at that time. And I don't know, there's some research to be done here, but this is a pencil drawing of the biotapestry, about 10% bigger than the original. And John Collingwood Bruce had his pupils colour it in, and all the rude bits at the bottom as well. And he used to take it round village halls and have his minion pin it up and point out to all the things. Unfortunately, somebody invented the camera, and then he could show slide pictures, so that became redundant. And it finished up in the Black Gate, but I'll come back to that later. John Collingwood Bruce only joined the Society of Antiquaries at the age of 39-ish in 1846, but he seemed to have taken over quite rapidly. Dobson was refurbishing the keep at that time. And I think one of the reasons for the society moving out from Lytton Fill was, of course, they were building a railway. The railway station was open, and I think some of the buildings at the back of the Lytton Fill had to be removed to make way for the railway. Anyway, the society decided to move out and move to the keep. And Dobson put all the twirly bits on the top of the keep, the battlements and things like that. And when it was all finished, they had a grand dinner in the great hall of the keep. They had 3 lines of tables. The centre table was the high table. The one on the left had a centerpiece of a boar's head, and the one on the right had a centerpiece of something equally revolting. But the middle table should have had a swan, but the swan never appeared. It was sent from London. Whether it was dead or alive isn't clear, and what happened to it, nobody knows. So now the society's moved into the keep. John Bell, by this time, was in his 60s, presumably a widower. And Collingwood Bruce suggested to him he'd like to take up residence in the keep. So he wasn't having anything about that. He said that people would be calling him day and night. And so this is why its term of librarian probably finished in 1849. But he was probably involved, Sonia has been involved in acquiring books. And from 1849 until 1880, there wasn't a librarian. In fact, it was a strange period because if you look at the Society's records, they didn't produce archaeology either. But John Collingwood Bruce was doing wonderful things to do with Roman walls and publications. So we get to 1880 when William Lyell was appointed as librarian. And this is just a reminder about the castle keep. This is a drawing we've got in the, well, it was hanging on my wall till we moved. It's now in the Society's office, drawn by Jack Slade, around about 1975. Jack Slade was a member of the Society, and I think he was the head of fine art at Northumbria University. And there's the Black Gate, as it was when I first remember it in the 1960s, which you can tell by the cars. So in the 1880s, the Society acquired the Black Gate and spent about £800 doing a rebuild, but the city also contributed. The museum was moved from the keep to the Black Gate. So the next character to come along is Charles Hunter Blair, and he was born in 1861. And so he was relatively old when he joined the society in in 1900. And it seems that the librarian, quite a lot of the librarians must have been fairly new members to the society, so they seem to get the job as a sort of starting job. But he was a remarkable character, and it's my regret I never met him. Apparently, he was a very formidable person. And in 1909, the library moved from the keep to the Black Gate, and it stayed in the Black Gate until 2009, so it was 100 years. And it was during his time that the Regional Library Lending Bureau was set up for the north of England. And the idea was that there would be a record of all the books in all the libraries, so you could borrow them. And that scheme was running until relatively recently. Well, it may still be running, but we haven't taken part in it for the last 15 years. And for that scheme, they required all the books in the system to be recatalogued. Well, incidentally, Charles Hunter Blair became editor of AA in 1924, and it was something he kept up to until he died in 1961. It was a remarkable achievement. So this interlibrary lending scheme, they had a thing called a union catalogue, and they introduced the system of shelving the books or labeling the books that we have up till today. Now, with history, it's rather difficult because do you classify the book as where it's from, or do you classify it by the historical period? And the two overlap. So in this system, anyway, Northumberland, books referring to Northumberland have got the initial letters AJ, and then the number is 1 onwards in the shelving. And Durham is AK, and Cumberland is AL, and Yorkshire's AM, and so forth. But if it's done by period, it just happens that prehistory is all under BC. Roman history is BF, Anglo-Saxon is BS or something like that. The cataloguing was done not by the librarian, but by a series of ladies who wrote out slips. It must have been all organised centrally, and sometimes the slips were sent to typists in London. And I say we're still using this system 90 odd years later, and that's the sort of folder it was filed in. So far we've had 20 librarians. I've highlighted the ones that I'm really talking about, because the other ones are only here for a fairly short time. And the present librarian is Mike, who's sat Mike up at the back there. Now we're coming to these 3 sisters, remarkable sisters, the Dodds. They lived in Gateshead. Of course, they were unmarried. There was a shortage of men after the First World War. The one on the right is Ruth, and her diary is in the Lytton Phil. They were involved in the Independent Labour Party and in the formation of the Gateshead Little Theatre. But Madeline in the middle, she was more academic, and she would have had a degree, only you couldn't get degrees. Women couldn't get degrees in those days. And she's contributed largely to the Durham county history. And then 4 volumes, she edited 4 volumes of the Northumberland county history. She was only librarian for 5 years, but because she developed macular degeneration and lost her eyesight, which a lot of people have these days, including my wife. So I'm coming on to my personal experience. I came to the Northeast in 1964 because my wife had a better job than I had, and so I moved up here. and started work in Preston Hospital. We saw an advert for a dig by Brian Dobson, and it's a dig at West Welpington. And as a result of that, well, it was a rescue dig at West Welpington because it was all being quarried away. And Brian got us to join the society. So I'll have been a member of this society for 60 years later this year. I got mixed up with Barbara Harbottle's research using the library extensively, and we became experts on campanology, is that right? Bell ringing on Thursday nights, which coincided. During this period, the American student was attacking libraries in the area. He had the clever ways of removing their reference cards. And if he didn't steal a book, he stole the illustrations. And fortunately, we've got a few books that's happened to. John Day was librarian for 11 years. And he got a lot of books rebound. And this is where the library chairs came in, because, try this. It was during this period that we decided to sell the library chairs to raise money. The society was very short of money at the time, and raised a considerable money for the library chairs. And that money went towards the book binding. At the same time, the ivory salt was sold. The ivory salt went under various names, and it's one of the earliest of these. It comes from somewhere in East Africa, and why we had it isn't terribly clear. But in the 1920s, a cast of it was made and given to the British Museum. But in the 1960s, we sold the original to the British Museum for a considerable amount of money, and that's the basis of the endowment fund, which is now quite a useful sum of money. And the endowment fund is used to some of the interest from it is used to do good things for the society, grants for this or that or the other. In 1970, Barbara Harbottle gave a talk to the society saying, "Is this society moribund?" and stirred various people into some action. And that's when I became the country walks, and I did the first country walk with the Chester's Aqueduct. I had John Gillam there to do the Roman bit of it. I just found out where it was, and various activities like that. And in 1972, Alfred Cox, who lived in Brighton, died and left us his entire collection of books and bagpipes. And we set up a bagpipe museum on the middle floor of the Black Gate. And that lasted there for about 10 or more years. And then I was now on the library committee, and William Gibson had left about 2,000 books. And I sort of semi-volunteered to list them one lunchtime a week. John Day resigned. George Wilson, who was the head of the ministries, it's known at Benton, Long Benton, he was very high up, and well, he was the head of it. He retired and became librarian, but he had a country house in Alston, and he decided to move to Alston, and suddenly, accidentally, I became librarian. That's where the accident comes from. So back to these chairs. About 10 years ago, I was approached by Christie's in New York to get some further information about the chairs, they had them, at this point, they had 6 of them, and they had them in the catalogue, and the estimated price was $500,000. And we've been sitting on in the library all those years. And a rather scruffy picture on the right-hand side is from the 1931 article in Archaeologia Aeliana, which gives you the history of them. So personal experience, as I say, have I done that bit? Oh no. Yes, I've finished with that. Right. So I was librarian for 41 years. Various things happened. 1982, we might remember the big freeze we had. The ice on the Tyne was 3 feet thick. The Black Gate was very cold. John Laffey was the warden of the keep, and he lived in the Black Gate flat. And one day he decided to have a bath, which is the usual thing to do. Put the plug in the bath, turn the hot tap on, and knee water came out. He went to investigate, but forgot to take the plug out. The weather got warmer, and about 2 months later, pipes in the middle of the thick wall of the castle thawed out. The water, the bath overflowed. The ceiling came down. Imagine the ceiling coming down on the library. It did absolutely no damage because previously the library had been arranged with bookshelves all across the room, but the floor was giving way under weight, and so they'd put some pillars in the middle and they'd move the bookcases right round the edge. So where the water fell, there was nothing under it other than the wooden cabinet that held all the filing cards, the catalogue cards. And because when you put water on wooden drawers, they seize up. So they seized up, and about 3 months later, they released, and there wasn't the slightest bit of damage. So then I decided it was time we did something about the cataloguing. And the idea was, I thought I'd already been dabbling with computers at work, so we'd have a computerized system. But then it seemed to mushroom out of control. Margaret Thatcher was running the government. There was mass unemployment. There was a scheme called, forgotten what it was called, doesn't matter. There was a scheme of employing, of giving out money to employ people to do jobs, job creation or something like that. And we had a member of the South Tyne Council, was a member of the society, Ken Charlton, and he got money through South Tyneside Council. And we employed 2 cataloguers, a supervisor, and 4 part-time typists for 3 years. And Roger here? No, Roger supervised it. Roger Fern. Because I mean, I'm not a librarian, and like all these things, projects, it never quite finished. They ran out of money. So I finished it off, and my sister-in-law typed the rest up. But unfortunately, there wasn't enough money at the time to buy a computer, which cost about £4,000 or £5,000. But actually spent 60-odd thousand pounds on that project. When it was finished, the Northumberland County Council. I'm glad I found this beaker. Northumberland County Council inherited a set of bagpipes. So it was decided to combine the Cox bagpipes with the ones from Northumberland and set up the Bagpipe Museum at Morpeth, which has been highly successful. But that meant that we had no body employed in the Black Gate to look after the library, the opening of it. Jim Milligan, who was the head of the Prescription Pricing Bureau down in the side, he stepped in and he organised a rota of volunteers to open the library 6 hours a week, Wednesday afternoon, Thursday night and Saturday morning, which seemed to cover all eventualities. And that system operated until we moved out in 2008 or 9. The next thing on the list was the Blackgate needed a new roof. And Dave oversaw that project. And John Nolan supervised the move where we packed all the books into boxes on day 1. On day 2, we took half the books out and put them into another box because they were too heavy. and we lowered them down through the trapdoor in the floor, which is absolutely frightening when you look down it. And the new roof was put on, and then we hauled them all back up again. And Peter was there when we did that. 2002, it was the Archives for All project, cataloguing archives, and quite a number of books that we had in the Black Gate had archive material glued in them. And so it was decided that because of the archive material, they were... Oh. Well, to tell me to shut up. So anyway, a lot of books went to the Morpeth Library. A lot more books went to the Northumberland Record Office. So this is what I'm talking about, the fragmentation of the library. But those books are still in our list, but they're not on the university book list, they're only on our list. And unfortunately, the Record Office didn't record the books under our reference. So I've done a lot of them, trying to find out where they are in their system. It was a great mistake. Around about 2008, Tom Yellerley, who is now very ancient and not very well, photographed the library for the record. And then in 2008 to 9, we packed up all the books and brought them up here. So there's a list of the librarians: Nicola Clark, Ian Bowers. 2018, Stafford Lindsay, well-known, what would you call him? Thank you, industrial archaeologist. He's got very old, and he had a huge collection of maps which he'd rescued, I think, from the city council when they were throwing them out, when they built the building over here and they were clearing out the old town hall. He'd rescued them. They're up in his attic, and Eric Waite, who is no longer with us, and I carried them all downstairs, took all the seats out the back of the car, and we put them in and went back the next week and got the map chest. And Mike very kindly has listed them all. So we're talking about librarians. Yes, we had, after Ian left, Tamsin was here for a year, and then Becca has been here now 2 years. During COVID, I took the advantage of the library being closed to create a 10-year space. And that's the 5th time I've done it. What you do is you take each section and make sure you've got enough space for the next 10 years by whatever means you can think of, including sometimes double shelving the books. Some were taken down to the Discovery Museum, journals which were online, will unlikely be required for people to actually see the book. So we got those out of the way. And then the future, well, who knows? But I'm not finished, so don't worry. Just to say something about library catalogues, I'll just briefly say this, that I've already discussed most of it. When we came to the, when libraries moved to the present location, they wanted us to reshelve the books under the Dewey classification. But all the books were taken to the university and given a Dewey number. But I took advice from the Society of Antiquaries in London, who said under no circumstances to drop Dewey. In any case, Dewey seems to keep changing its system anyway. So we have a double system. And in the university, they listed under Dewey, but they have our shelf number there as well. These are just a list of volunteers that I've had since 1987. There's very few people here tonight, and most of the people have passed on. Grace and Frank McCombie are now both in care homes. And at the Great North Museum, Howard Cleve unfortunately died 2 years ago, and Barbara Harbottle about 8 years ago, 10 years ago. So the present volunteers, well, Mike was a volunteer, he's now a librarian. Beth McNestry, who's probably online, Peter Nicol over there, Phil Ferkel. Phil Ferkel's looking after the journals. Mike's looking after the whole of the library, but I've retained looking after the tracts. So now some pictures of the Black Gate. On the left-hand side is the Black Gate, and you see how the shelves are arranged around the walls. And when we moved those bookcases, that's where the rest of the Bayer tapestry was. It was all pinned at the back of there and exceedingly dirty. It was taken to the keep. There was going to be a project to clean it up, but that fell through. And eventually I managed to get them all over to the Discovery Museum and listed them using the Penguin book that had been published to mark the page number, so we got them all in order. And you see the pillars in the middle of the room, and the pillar on that pillar there is the same as that pillar over there. And where the windows are at the far side was a little room called a carrel, which had been made in the 1960s because you could keep it warm. And there's another picture. You can see there's the windows of the carrel. That pillar there is that pillar over there. And that's how it's laid out now. And these are pictures taken by Yellowly. I forgot Tom. Yeah. This is the this is just our office now. The map chest that came from Stafford Lindsay. These are books as arranged. It's unfortunate that there's just not enough space in that library, and most of our books are in closed access. That means they're in moving bookshelves. So there's only a selection of books on the open shelves, and this is why the numbers are not continuous on the book labels, because we've only got on display the books which are in good order and relatively modern. And these are some of the big books. If it's got a band round, it means it needs repair. These books are interesting books with leather bindings, but what do? They're not on display, and so my gut reaction is to replace the leather by cloth. Leather bound books of that type cost well over £100 to rebind. And we've got several hundred. Big books got to be laid flat. Tracts are my interesting things. When I took over as librarian, the tracts were bound in volumes in leather backed books, but we've now got them in acid-free containers, which is much more sensible. There's the tracts. These are journals stored in the movable shelving, and then a discovery store. We've got the overflow, and on the left-hand side, you just see those black rolls. They're the Buyer tapestry rolls. This is just a guess. We've got about 40% of the books in open access and 40% in closed access. Roughly 10% at the Discovery Store, 4% at the Bagpipe Museum, 4% at the Record Office, and the rest are missing, lost, pinched, you name it. The geographical area covered, well, I just call it the northern frontier of the Roman Empire, northern UK frontier of the Roman Empire, or the Anglian Kingdom of Northumberland, Humbert IV, but obviously centred around Newcastle, Durham, Northumberland. That's just a list of the society's deposit in the archives. I'll explain later to you how to find things if you can't find them by doing a simple search. If you find one of those entries and then go along through it, sometimes you can find things not listed. There's on the left is Phil, looking after journals, Mike, the present librarian, and at a desk in the corner is Becca. That's the map chest. I think I've seen that. Society publications. We had this new bookcase made for the office to put a reference copy of all the society's publications in. This is the Office Guardian. We'll say no more about it. I don't know what its origin is. So now we're on to the future. It's the year 2035. All new books are digital. All existing books have been scanned automatically, page by page, by penetrating radiation. And this technique's already been used on some rolls from Israel, like the Dead Sea rolls, but they've been carbonized by being in a fire, and so you can't open them. But sending this radiation through a fraction of a millimeter at a time, and then using artificial intelligence, they're going to be read. So maybe we won't need books anymore. So what do you do with the ones that you scrap? Oh, David might know something about this. It's a mile castle at Caulfield Quarry about 10 years ago. I don't know who built it or why it was built, but there we are. And then finally, there was going to be two books on display, but there's just one, the two dissertations by John Bell, given at the first meeting. It's got his signature in, and the old laws of Scotland. I'll leave that. When you visit the library, you can see other fine examples. I rest my case.